So for the gospel reading, I've chosen another story, this time from the Hebrew Scriptures, and I want to try to unpack it as well in my own fashion. Facetiously, I call it, the story of passing the apple, and it's the first stage in the evolution of the notion of culpability, of human beings. And it's from Genesis chapter 3. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" "You will certainly not die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked. So I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "Why have you done this?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. Then the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. These are words inspired by God. So there's an old rabbinical Jewish story that follows on to this gospel, this account from Genesis chapter 3. And it says that after Adam and Eve had been kicked out of the garden, they really wanted to get back in and taste the fruit again. And so one evening, when the cherubim with the flaming swords weren't actually paying attention, they snuck back into the garden and up to the tree, and they were about to pluck a fruit from the tree, and they hear rustling in the branches. And they find a very embarrassed God also eating from the fruit. Some years ago, I did a 3-day seminar in Mount Shasta, and for this October, I want to revisit the topics I covered back then. And so my theme for October, I call it Amazing Grace, Adventure, and Returning Home. So today, with God's help, I'll talk about leaving home on God's behalf. Next Sunday, God willing, I'll talk about nostalgia and going back home. And then October 20th, I'll do a recap and a Q&A. So what does it look like to leave home on God's behalf? It's what Hinduism will call the game of Lila, the descent of the game of Lila. Now, one of the most beautiful kind of mystical unpacking of this story I've ever heard was from our friend Lorraine Moore, when she commented on this story about God making garments to cover the nakedness of Adam and Eve. And here was Lorraine's hit on it, and it's really beautiful, really deep. Lorraine says that when God made these garments of skin, it wasn't about covering their nakedness or making up for their sin. It was about giving them spacesuits for incarnation. And that the garments of skin that God fashioned for Adam and Eve were in fact, preparing them for incarnation. It was the spacesuits that they needed for incarnation. And that for me is a much more likely kind of understanding of the story. The beloved disciple John would say the very same thing in his prologue to his gospel, where using the word logos, which is the kind of the morphological agent, the intelligence that creates form out of matter, And John says, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. And so there we have the same story again, that God is creating a flesh garment for the Word in order to have an incarnational experience on planet Earth. So in this process, as we're clothed with these spacesuits, there are 7 different levels of spacesuits that we inhabit, it seems to me, looking at the Hindu model. So firstly, we start off and we're united with Source. There is only God. Before God self-fractures, there is only the transcendent reality of unity consciousness. And then God self-fractures into souls, the Netzotsim. And this is the beginning of God's immanence. This is how God, manifests herself in creation. And stage 3 then is that souls still stay connected to God via what's called sometimes the causal body or the psychic body. And this is a kind of a metaphysical articulation of entanglement theory, this great theory of an Irish physicist, John Bell, way back in the 1960s, that all elements, everything in the universe is connected. All cells are connected, all atoms are connected. So there's the entanglement theory, that even though we are discrete entities, we're Netzotsim, we're sparks of the divine, we're all connected to each other and to Source itself. That will be the stage 3. Stage 4 is then we adopt a mental body, the place of ratiocination, what Plato will call the ideal realm, the place of the archetypes, where we create the blueprints for subsequent stages of incarnation. We're creating the ideal outcomes, the heroes we want, and the lives we want to live. And so this is the place in which we do all of the planning. Stage 5 is then we put down the astral body level of the spacesuit. And now we're dependent upon dreams, emotions, and we experience parallel lifetimes. So this is the place we go at night time when we're dreaming and in deep visionary states. We come down, the next level of the skin suit is the etheric body or the energy template. It is the élan vital. It is this level of the self that homeopathy and Chinese medicine and acupuncture will talk about, the vital force itself. And then finally, the final printout at ground zero is the physical body itself. And at this level, before this, we couldn't experience time or space or matter. They did not exist until we came down to the physical level. And now we're constrained by space and time and matter and energy. And to make matters worse, we have amnesia. We've forgotten who we were and are. We've forgotten whence we came, and we've forgotten what our mission is. And so there is the adventure of disassociating from Source in order to be able to fully appreciate what is it like when we reunite with the realization that at our core we're divine beings who are incapable of ever being separated from Source. But we play this game of hide and go seek with ourselves so as to experience what is it like to begin the chase of remembering who we are. So we then begin, when we start that journey, we begin what I would call then the Ascension project, back home to God. And I believe that there are 4 distinct tracks to that Ascension process. And the first track is the individual soul in the course of a single lifetime or a single incarnation. And so what is the mission of that particular stage? It is to awaken personally to the realization that I am God stuff. To roll back the amnesia, to be able to recognize God in others and in myself, and then to remember there was a reason why I came, there was a purpose why I came. And so in the course of any one lifetime, that's the purpose here. To awaken, to roll back the amnesia, to recognize God, self, and other, and finally to remember that you volunteer for this. You have a purpose here. That's the first track. The second track I would call the individual soul over many lifetimes or many incarnations, and now we build some guideposts into it. So the first one is karma. Now karma is always misunderstood. We think karma is whereby I'm punished in subsequent incarnations for mistakes I made in previous incarnations. That is not karma. Karma is the life plan that I and my guides created before I incarnated. It is the outline of the life I'm going to live, without the details, but the outline of it. So because I have a mission and a purpose. So karma is about the life plan. And so from lifetime to lifetime, I'll try to hone until I'm closer and closer and closer to that basic life plan. Now, there's two words which are often misunderstood. So I call it fate and destiny. Fate is what happens when I am misaligned to the karma. I've set a life plan for myself. I've done it with my guides at the other side. I come into life, there's amnesia, and I'm totally misaligned with the plan that I created. And my fate then is what it's like at the end of my life. I go back and I realize I totally blew it, or I blew large sections of it. So my fate is that I'm now going to have to deal with the misaligned karma. Now, if I get it right at some stage, then instead of fate, there's destiny. And destiny is what happens when you get it right, when you're in total alignment with the purpose of which you came. After several, maybe hundreds of lifetimes and incarnations, you followed the plan. You followed it, realizing that only love works. And now your destiny is that you can return to Source. But we will keep reincarnating until there's a full, permanent awakening to that realization. About 2 weeks ago, as is my norm, before I go to sleep at night, I seed my dreams and I say, like, I want to get insights on a particular issue that I'm working in waking consciousness. And so somebody had asked me a few weeks before that. I had done an interview with EVO, evolutionary biology, sports people, and somebody asked me, what is Christ consciousness? And as a result of that, I brought that into my dream, and I got the following kind of answer to it. Christ consciousness is the permanent awareness of the inner divinity of all creatures. If I never kind of realize anything in my life except that one statement, it would help me to awaken. That Christ consciousness is the permanent awareness of the inner divinity of all creatures. The ability to see God in everything. To pick up a flower and see God in it. To see a newborn baby and see God there. Even to see a coyote chasing a rabbit across my compound, as I saw a few days ago, and to see God in both of them. The predator and the prey. So that's the second track, the individual soul over many lifetimes. The third track, I believe, is the ascension of the entire human race, not just the individuals of which it's composed. And this was Gaia's promise to God. This was a vision I had more than 30 years ago, where I saw souls volunteering in the sight of God for particular missions. And one great Mahatma, one great soul, raised its hand and said, I volunteer to go to the third rock from the sun in that particular solar system, and I will breed life until I throw up a species capable of recognizing its own divinity and ipso facto the divinity of all other beings with whom it shares the planet. So in other words, Gaia's promise was to create what I would call a namaste species. A species who would recognize the divinity within everything it meets in the course of the day. A species that, because they recognize the divinity in everything else, would end war and end greed. It would move from self-engrossed narcissism to compassion for everybody. And so that's track 3 for the entire species itself. And then track 4, I would say it is the journey of the cosmos over the lifespan of the universe. Because part of the mission of souls is to incarnate in other worlds. So when we talk about extraterrestrials or extra-dimensionals, they're also articulations of the divine, which are having experiences in different physical worlds and even in non-physical worlds. They're higher orders, often like the angelic beings. At many, many, many different levels, they're taking on particular kinds of space suits. So when God clothed Adam and Eve, He's not just clothing them to kind of hide their nakedness. He's giving them spacesuits necessary for an incarnation in a particular level of density. And He makes clothes for all beings at all levels. Now, every culture that I've ever lived in, it ritually honors the progression of the heavens through what are called yugas, these great time spans, since we're stuck in time. And some of these yugas can last for thousands of years or even millions of years. In the Hindu notion, for instance, they talk about Mahayugas, great cycles. And for them, a cycle is 4.32 billion years. It's fascinating, which is almost the age of planet Earth. And they believe that when God breathes in, the universe comes into being, and when God breathes out, the universe ceases to exist. So with every breath cycle of God, there's a creation of a new cosmos and the expiration date of that cosmos. The great Mayans of Mesoamerica had these smaller kinds of cycles of 5,125 years, and they talk about the periodicity of this repeating again and again and again. So we also see kind of fractals of this where we map the seasons of the year. We'll talk about spring and summer and autumn and winter, or we'll talk about the monthly phases of the moon. And so there's this like perennial dance of day and night, of light and darkness. So that's a season within a season within a season. Now, embedded then in this wondrous mystery are the equally mysterious stages of the journey of the individual human being, to go right back to track one again. And in order to help us in this journey, cultures have created, what have been called sacraments or rites of passage that are vitally important. So a sacrament or a rite of passage in any culture is about syncing nature with culture. It is the wedding of the god and the goddess. For instance, in Celtic mythology, the gods represent, the goddess represents nature and the gods represent culture. So it's this wedding between the god and the goddess, between nature and culture. It is the wedding of the cosmic and the individual. So I want to just walk through a few well-known mappings, some famous human thinkers who've created particular kinds of maps in order to help us understand this journey. Those of you who've read any of Shakespeare, there's one great play called As You Like It, in which Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. And then he goes through 7 different stages of the average human being. So it starts off as an infant, and then a schoolboy, and then a lover, and then a soldier, and then a justice, and then an old man in pantaloons, and then old age itself, decrepit old age. So there's Shakespeare's 7 stages of human being. An extraordinary psychologist called Erikson talked about 8 distinct psychosocial stages of evolution, and having to do with particular missions at these particular parts, and an age-related circumambulation. So the first stage he called trust versus mistrust. And this is the stage that occurs during infancy, from birth until about 18 months. And so the little infant is radically dependent on the environment. And it's going to figure out quickly, can I trust this environment, or do I need to mistrust? Am I being abused here, or am I being nurtured here? So that's the first mission of the little child for the first 18 months. To learn trust or mistrust. From about 18 months to 3 years, he called it autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this happens during toddlerhood, and particularly around toilet potty training, where a child is learning control over itself. And depending on whether or not it's allowed autonomy and to learn at its own rate or given help, there's going to be shame and doubt if mother and father and everybody who's making fun of it are shouting at it. Then there'll be shame and doubt will be part of that child's character. The third stage is from about age 3 to 5 years, and it is initiative versus guilt. And this occurs in the preschool age, when the child is beginning to learn. It's playing with friends outside. And so depending on how well it's doing and the reaction it's getting from parents and other friends, it's going to be creative and have initiative, or it'll be guilty because everything it does is wrong. Stage 4 is industry versus inferiority, and this is for a school-age child from age 5 to 12. Now they're part of a much bigger group, and they're learning history and geography and mathematics, and depending on how they're graded and how they're regarded by their teachers, they're going to be industrious, or they're going to feel, I'm useless, I don't get this stuff, there's no point even in trying. The next stage is from age 12 to 18, and it is identity versus role confusion. This occurs during adolescence. And I have to say that at this stage of human history, this is perhaps an extraordinarily difficult period for modern adolescents, because they'll be giving extraordinarily kind of mixed messages about who they are. Even their gender identity is being called into question. So this is a particularly difficult period right now in human history, this identity versus role confusion of the adolescents of our world. From age 19 to 40, we have the intimacy versus isolation. This is young adulthood. And now you're going to have your first serious kind of romantic relationship, get married, and begin having children of your own. So now you're going to find intimacy in the world, or you can't find a partner, you can't get married, nobody wants you, and you feel totally isolated. The next stage is generativity versus stagnation. This is middle adulthood, from about 40 years to 65 years of age. And this is, where you begin to realize that you have a bigger mission. It's not just about raising your own children. You're concerned about not just even your own grandchildren, but maybe all the children of the world. They're your mission as well. So now there's the generativity, that you're creatively responding to the situations of the world rather than stagnating and looking out for yourself. And then the final stage is integrity versus despair. This is late adulthood from 65 years on. So am I now living with integrity? Am I in alignment with my mission, or am I despairing because I never figured out what my mission was? Therefore, I haven't accomplished it. I'm now in my 60s or 70s or 80s, and I feel like I've done nothing. Why the hell did I even live? So that was Erikson said in it. Really powerful one. The great Confucius believed that a sense of personal identity is actually an illusion created by the sum of our social roles. He believed that every human being was involved in 5 significant social roles, and that our sense of identity was composed of the meshing of these 5. And the 5 significant relationships were husband and wife, parents and children, elder brother and younger siblings, teacher and student, emperor and subjects. And that every human being, particularly in China of the time, Confucius lived about 550 before the Common Era, so that everybody, was in those relationships. You were either a husband or a wife, you're a parent or a child, or both. You were either an elder brother or a younger sibling. You were either a teacher or a student, and there was one emperor, and then the rest of us were subjects. And all of us found ourselves, trying to live out these 5 kind of missions at the same time. And that, for him, was growth. Those of you who were raised Roman Catholic realize that the Roman Catholic Church had 7 stages of initiation. So there was baptism, and then confirmation, and then confession, and then communion, and then marriage, and then ordination, and then the last rites. So they're trying to walk you through the various the most important stages of your life, and have some kind of a recognized social kind of a ceremony where everybody could participate and witness, your evolution. And for the Kalenjin people among whom I lived in East Africa, there were 3 great stages to life. There was the birthing process, initiation into warriorhood, and then initiation into elderhood. And the entire tribe celebrated these rites of passage. They weren't excuses just to party, but it represented a kind of a change in the tribal status of the initiate, hugely important in the life of the child or the adult. So with initiation came not just privilege. I'm no longer just a child, I'm a warrior of the group. I'm not just a warrior anymore, I'm an elder of the group. But it wasn't just a privilege, it was also, there was a responsibility came with the change in status. And often these ceremonies in many parts of the world, they ritually and sometimes very realistically and very frighteningly involved a death phase. That part of the initiation rite literally put you in peril of losing your physical life. And so I composed a little kind of prayer last night as I was putting my kind of finishing touches to what I wanted to say. And so I wrote this piece. If you want to be a warrior on the way, you have to be prepared to face the possibility of death many times. And not just the death of this spacesuit, but the death of the etheric, of the astral, of the mental, and of the psychic bodies, and even of the soul itself. Waves are simply temporary manifestations of the ocean, and the ocean will always bring our children back home. So why would you settle for a single separated perspective when you can have the unity and the unitive experience as God itself? Namaste, my brothers and sisters.